All right, can we see who is here by Zoom? Hi, Larry.
Hello. It looks like it's just me as panelist, and then Mark Hoffman, the new community development director, also on Zoom, but no other tree board members.
No, yeah, and no guests, either in person or on Zoom. Is Mark, does Mark in a video in, or is he just audio only?
No, I was just promoted to panelist, all set.
All right, so Mark, you are the only one who doesn't know everybody here. So even though we got started and bypassed the introductions, let's pause now and do introductions for Mark's sake. Why don't we go around first, and then I'll ask you to introduce yourself, Mark. I'm Dick Olmsted, and I am the of the tree board. I've been on the tree board for about 5 years now, and am a retired professor at UW. Mark, I guess you're next senior here on the.
Yeah, Mark Phillips. Mark, good to see you. We had a chance to meet the other night at the council meeting, I guess. So
Yes.
glad you're joining us. I've been on the tree board about a year, so I'm one of the newer members also.
But Mark was the council liaison for a few years
That's right.
before, so he's familiar. Victoria?
I'm Victoria Kutal. Good to meet you. I've been on the tree board for 1 whole month, so still learning the ropes, and I'm excited to be here.
Hi, Mark. I'm Stacy Spain, also very new to the tree board. Very excited to be here. My daytime is spent working for Google as a Stratton Ops lead for the legal department, actually. So,
Elizabeth?
Not sure we can see. I'm Elizabeth. I'm the assistant planner for the city.
See your boss.
Yes.
Okay.
He is.
And Larry?
Hey, yeah, we know each other. I'm Larry Goldman, council member. I'm the current liaison to the tree board, and I'm coming to you from a hotel room in Florida.
Oh,
Wow.
okay, Mark, will you introduce yourself? Give us just a brief background.
Thank you, and apologies for the technical sign-in issue in the last half hour. My name is Mark Hoffman. I've been in Lake Forest Park 4 weeks now, so this is my first tree board meeting. Prior to this, I was briefly at Newcastle, and then after COVID, I did some consulting and an interim position at Bainbridge Island, and then a long period at City of Snoqualmie before that, all involving trees. So it's a nice topic for me.
Right. Well, thank you. Okay, so we had initiated the meeting and gone through the agenda and added a couple of agenda items, including a discussion of the ivy removal demonstration project that Marty had started planning in the fall. And Stacy had expressed an interest in taking over the lead on that, which would be great.
Yeah.
And we had just discussed the possibility of this being our Arbor Day event for 2024. That gives us a couple months lead time to get a permit and get organized about how we're going to do it. And this will, I think, be a good option. You know, in the past we've planted trees, but now we're going to go save trees.
Well, you know, I was working with Marty on that. And so I have developed some thoughts that
Okay.
I'd like to work with you on that or share with you.
Perfect.
Like the location that I think would be good that we talked about.
Yeah.
How that would work.
all ideas welcome and will be acted upon.
All right, now. You're gonna be in deep recovery at that point, I suppose?
Well, so,
Hard to tell, I guess.
yeah, but they say I should be sort of really fully mobile and everything in 6 weeks. So by late April, I anticipate being pretty much back to normal, not fully full strength or somewhat. But I could,
I mean, there may be a benefit to having a professor of forestry involved in this thing to it, you know,
Definitely.
in some regard, if not,
maybe we can do interviews
Yeah.
thing where, we talk to each other and then any of the hard work you can do.
Yeah, for sure, like the actual, like pulling, a couple of quick questions. One, we have to get a permit. Do we have to figure out what we're gonna do before we get the permit? Like, can we just get a perfect permit for the general location and
I think we have to know location and what the activity is gonna be, how many people we anticipate.
so how are we gonna market it?
And so, all of those things can be just rough estimates.
Okay. How many people came to the last Arbor Day?
Not that many, maybe 10,
Okay.
12, mostly board members and council members and the mayor.
Okay.
And a few people who were walking by.
What kind of marketing did y'all do for it, or?
We put it on the website, we announced it in the e-news, I think, and a few things like that.
the biggest things to come out of this project might be the announcement that goes out where it would include some discussion of ivy and why it's a problem. That would be, and just getting that word out again. And then the video, which be their long-term kind of use.
Yeah,
I think it'd be great if we could get 30 or 35 people to show up. Good too, but I think there's benefits to those pieces of it.
yeah.
In terms of educating about ivy.
Yeah. You could write something maybe for the LFP news to come out in the month
Yeah,
that
yeah,
this is gonna happen.
yeah. Yeah.
Alert people
And a
to
public
that.
announcement, via the shoreline area. too, so.
Maybe Victoria can help us get to 35.
I was gonna say, I do love doing outreach materials, so if you're looking
Oh,
for
yeah.
things like a poster to put on the board up in the town center. Commons or things like that, be happy to do some design work on that once you have your details pinned down.
Good.
Great.
Good, well, I'll leave it for you guys to
Yeah,
start, but don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions. I actually think I have a form
I have one more.
someplace for the permit.
Oh, great, excellent. And then did anyone mark out like what the video would say, like things? to-
No, we hadn't gotten that far.
Okay, got it.
So, I think it was going to be fairly ad hoc. I don't think it's gonna be scripted necessarily, but I
Okay,
think it'd be good to know what points to
General
cover.
topic.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And then 2 additions, count me in. And right now we've started a recruitment for urban forest planner. And so that staff person will be on board and would love to attend and participate.
Perfect.
Well, that's excellent. Is that essentially what we've called an arborist in the past?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that person will be an ex officio member of this board, if it's run the same way we did with the arborist in the past.
That's correct. Elizabeth and the urban forest planner will be the primary staff contacts. And then I'll attend as items are there, but also participate in any efforts that the tree board does or answer permitting questions with Elizabeth. So there's 3 of us.
Good. It'll be nice to have a full complement of staff, but support,
Well,
because we've been.
Well, the opportunity is golden then, Mark, and while we're on this topic, Elizabeth got us a copy of the special events permit application. I'm not sure that that's the right one for an agency, essentially a part of the city as we are. I mean, if the planning commission was doing an event, would they have to go through a permitting process? If I don't know, the climate action committee was doing an event, would they have to go through a special events permitting process? I don't know. But just looking at it, like it wanted us to verify our insurance coverage, for example, and some other things that made me think that this is really for a non-city group where it makes sense. And I want to, clearly, the police department needs information about the event. And there are probably others who need information about the event, but I'm not sure if that's the proper way that it gets conveyed to them. So
We could look into that. I'll read all those sections in municipal code. Sometimes it's not so specific that the best way to accomplish what you need to accomplish is through that permit, but that it may be city insurance and so forth. So we'll go through all of those categories, business license. A standardized form doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way to go. But if it's been done in the past, there's probably a reason. So we'll look into that with you way in advance.
I left a message on Phil's phone this afternoon asking the same question, so he might be thinking about it too.
Okay, I'll field it. He's gone till Monday in Utah, but I'll field that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's this is the copy of the
Yeah,
form that we did for the Arbor Day event, and I just left the question about insurance blank.
yeah, well, maybe that's it, fill out what you know, and if stuff doesn't make sense, you leave it blank.
And it still got approved, so.
Well, I
Okay.
don't know why it should be approved. I mean, we're part of the city essentially, and the city, we're doing the city's business.
Yeah.
I mean, we plan it with them, with folks in the city, so we should all be on the same team when it comes to that point, and
Yeah, I got the sense that it was less an approval process as much as it was a scheduling and.
FYI process.
Yes.
Make sure the right people
Communication.
know about
Like
it.
the police want to know, there's gonna be parking
Yeah.
and stuff that we're gonna have to think about if we do get 35 people and 7 or 8 cars. The place we're thinking about has excellent parking. It's a very good location for this, but still might be a little congregation of people there.
Yeah.
As a new person, I'm still learning the city. What is the location so that I can familiarize?
Well, I think we can talk about it one more time, but it's 19055 35th Avenue Northeast. It's
Thank you.
it's up 35th and it's the driveway, it's right at, there's a driveway to a place called the Carrie Lewis Homes. Up there on 35th, and it's kind of right along, just inside. It's on private property, it's just inside the right of way, the trees that we have in mind for that. We've already talked to the owners or the legal entity that would give us permission, and they're happy to have us do it there. The Stream Keepers Group has tested water there for a number of years, so they're used to people coming in and doing stuff there with their stream. But so anyway, that's the location we're thinking about. There was another thought that 165th along the Burke Gilman Trail had some prospect too, and I was really hoping to get down there before this meeting, because I haven't seen it myself, and I need to get to that. So
I can take some pictures.
we might check that out. and
Yeah.
see if that's a possibility, but I tend to like the 35th Avenue site.
Yeah, the sad thing about that is that last year it still needed ivy removal, and you're saying it's still, I'm sorry, last year it needed ivy removal around this time, and you're saying it still needs ivy removal.
Well, yeah, we told them to hold off, leave the ivy alone.
Very depressing.
We're still working on this, so don't remove that ivy.
Okay.
Well, Stacy, you certainly know how much ivy there is in the city. It's just that having a place that's easily accessible
Yeah,
to do a demo or something is.
Yeah. Got it.
A little harder, some of the more remote woodlots. Okay, well, let's turn our attention to the work plan then. That was in the material that was passed around, so you should, so you should have a copy of that in front of you. So this is basically the 2022 work plan. All you'll see different is that I changed 2022 or the 2023 work plan. And so my hope is to go over this, scratch out anything we think is done or that we want to mark off, add anything that's new, update anything, consider, target dates and who on the tree board will be involved, tree board or the staff. The things that are highlighted in yellow are things that we identified as priorities last year, at least initially in the early part of the year, and we never got around to coming back to this mid point in the year to see where we were on those as I intended, but that's why there are some that are marked in yellow that we don't need to have any assign any meaning to that today. Okay, And it's designed, it's, broken down into 3 sections that go along with the 3, well, 3 of the 4, I guess. There are 4, new enumerated sections at the start of the work plan, public outreach, tree planting and maintenance, and advising, the mayor and the council. And we sort of combined 3 and 4 on this last year because we couldn't see a particular reason why they were 2 distinct sections. I'll make a note to combine that in the introduction there too. Okay. The first part, let's go through public outreach and education. This first one, reviewing the Lake Forest Park web content and incorporate code changes. This is something that's been on our work plan for years, in part because we've been, so for a while, we were waiting for the city council to incorporate some changes in the code, which has been done now. So I think this is something that would be good to go forward, and largely this is a matter of trying to make sure that everything that's public facing on the website is consistent with the code and also is easily found and, you know, interpretable. So this was Sandy and Mandy were doing this, and Marty last year, but none of them are any longer on the board. This is one that's probably good to have a staff person working with 3 board members on this. Anybody, I'm looking at Victoria.
I would be more than happy to work on it, mostly from the point of view of like navigability and making sure that things are intuitive and easy to find. I noticed when I visited the site, it looks like at least part of this city website has been recently redesigned.
Yes, there's sort of constant
so,
updates.
Yeah,
And some things are better now than they were a few years ago.
yeah.
Some things probably haven't been changed much. Elizabeth, can you work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the website every day.
Yeah.
I can take a look at that.
And certainly, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was gonna say, I know Sandy did a lot of work on that. And that, I guess I would maybe caution us to be a little slow, a little deliberate, I guess, in terms of moving on those things. You've had a chance to look at it. I think the work that she was doing touched on a number of areas of the website. Not only just being sure that the updated code was kind of embedded throughout, but I think there was stuff to do about it. She had ideas about this description of this group.
Yeah.
And some other things like that. In my experience working on websites, you can get overwhelmed pretty quickly. And you may be much more adept than I've been in the past, but I would think being deliberate with a few things that might make sense would be a way to go, and then see where we went from there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Incremental improvements.
Yeah, and I was curious, I think it's touched on in some of the materials that were sent to us after the last meeting of some of her recommendations. But wasn't sure if there was any other documentation of any like updates or requests or anything that she had compiled, since I know that she spent a long time. I don't want to just duplicate what was done within the last year. So if there is any other documentation that she provided to the board within the last.
I think that stuff
That single document that had the brochure and then the social posts and then some
Yes,
other
right.
pieces
that
after
was
it.
a main
Okay,
part. I don't remember anything.
Yeah.
Specific.
I'll go back and look through that.
We had a
that
target
before I-
date of May on this from last year, but I think in light of what Mark just said, we could just make this an ongoing or later
Yeah,
date. That rather than feel like it's something that we have to try to get done right away. Okay. I'm gonna take notes on this and send you guys a revised version of this, and at the next board meeting, I want to be able to approve it so that we can forward it to the mayor.
Perfect.
And the city council. Okay, develop content to improve public outreach, including property owners. So this is what Sandy had really been working on. And we've already got a start on that with her work, and you and Mark have expressed interest in working on this, and
I would love to carry that
whoever
work
else.
forward.
Okay, and so this is something I think we should consider a priority this year and try to get content out. I know Sandy felt a little frustrated, and Marty too, at how slow we were moving last year, but part of that was we didn't have good, stable contact in the city government, and we do now, and I'm looking forward to, being able to work closely with the city staff on this.
I think it's another area where there's a lot of potential pieces in there.
Mhm.
It'd be good to maybe triage that a bit.
And I think it'd be good to be thinking, and Sandy was being fairly strategic about this, but I'm not sure everybody on the board understood where this was going. Let's have goals, have targets, right?
Yep.
And try to think in terms of, okay, what is the information that we have developed, or what do we need to have to achieve a certain end?
There certainly was a brochure, there's something about a brochure, I think, and then if there are several iterations of that, that might be something to think about. If there's one for the public,
Yep.
one for realtors. But I think the city has a fact sheet.
Yeah, I have the document she was working on. I can send that. I think we saw it on the November 20th.
Which got forwarded to us. That's
Oh,
it's like a Word document that got forwarded to, I
Yeah,
think, both of
yeah.
us after the last meeting,
Okay.
that has the brochure template and then some social media templates and some
Yeah,
other breakdowns
I
of
like that.
things.
It's like a
Um,
PDF though, it wasn't like the
It-
original.
yes, and
Yeah, I don't think she had that, right?
Oh, I don't
I
know
know
what
one of the
original
questions
is.
last time was, can we edit this in any way? Do we
Yeah.
still have capabilities to do that? I was bored watching Netflix the other night and took a stab at like redesigning some of the brochure pieces using content that she had developed, but putting it into a bit more
Good.
kind of aesthetically just less information, taking some of the feedback that had been given already. So I've got a mock-up of that
So-
that I can.
Are you
Sure.
thinking that there is original material that we need to get from her?
Not if you already did it.
So if we want to use the designs that she provided, we can absolutely ask her for that. I know one of the questions was, how was it created and where can
Yeah,
it be
before
edited? The program that I use is a free online software, Canva, that's widely used, super simple format, super simple drag and drop tools. And can be shared, so I can create a link that anyone with the link can edit it, so I can share that with the rest of the board and with the city, so that anyone can create a free account and edit the documents forever.
If you use any of her designs and you have images, it's probably best to have the original, so that the images are kind of like the best format for the
Yeah.
website.
Yeah.
Otherwise they can be fuzzy or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you'd like to see, I printed out, if you would like to see what I threw together literally in like 45 minutes watching Netflix the other night, but just playing with things from her content, so.
We got a little bit of a late
We have
start.
things
Let's work
to get
through this,
through,
our
yes.
work plan, and if we have time,
So we can come back to it. Did you say you wanted to work on
Yeah, sure,
the
yeah.
media and outreach stuff?
And I just quickly, another thing that I think would be on my list of top items would be a kind of a list of topics for the newsletter.
Yeah.
Because we're gonna be contributing to that newsletter quarterly or with some schedule. We
Yeah.
should probably have 5 or 6 topics in mind that we think would be timely.
Yeah.
Even maybe starting with some initial background. I mean, these are short pieces. But
Yeah.
At least a list of topics might be good to have.
I think.
And I would align those to like social media posts as well that you do, just
I
figure
think
out a
that's more
cadence
important
and
than
do.
brochures. Yeah.
Yeah.
Social media, so.
I also designed some social media posts.
Me too. I love your sense of urgency.
I do a lot of this for work.
Something about Ivy, for example, which
Yeah.
we could try to do that in April to have it coincide with the Ivy removal demonstration. Would be good, and then I have actually a sort of a list of things that I had thought of over the years that I would consider writing up, ranging from natural history about trees to practical applications of.
Excellent.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So is that, for that action item on here, in terms of who's gonna follow up with it throughout the year, is that just me and you for now? Okay.
Yeah, and then obviously anybody can be drawn in, but
Yeah.
what I'd like to do for the work plan is at least get a name or two of people, and I would
I like it.
have Elizabeth down there too, just to have city
Perfect.
contact involved with that.
We've already knocked out the next one too.
Yeah.
Look at us go.
Yeah, and the next one is the Arbor Day activity, which we
No,
have
got locked.
already talked about and sort of have a plan for. I think if everybody's agreeable for that, let's go for that, because we're not gonna have the money from the transit system yet to plan on spending or to develop for major tree planting effort. Maybe next year we could do something around that. I don't know when that all is gonna come to, but
So that one reason that's important is because it will allow us to keep our status as a tree city.
yeah. Yeah, that's the requirement, that, and the city's required to do it, and we're charged with carrying it out.
Yep.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is staying in communication with peer advocacy and stakeholder groups, so people like the Stewardship Foundation, the Parks Board, Climate Action Committee, and so on. So we have had pretty good communication with the Stewardship Foundation. We haven't had so much communication with the Parks Board, but it seems to me that there are ways that we could interact with them around trees. I mean, since our parks are largely treed here in Lake Forest Park. And maybe we should come up with some ideas for that. With respect to the next item on this menu or this agenda or work plan of the tree walks, which is something I've been working on over the last few years, so trying to update them one at a time, is thought that we could do some educational outreach about trees associated with individual parks, like with Animal Acres or with Horizon View or with, 5 Acre Woods or something like that, that where we could, even if it was something just like a QR code at a park sign, and then prepare some information that somebody could download and have with them in the park.
That's an excellent idea.
And that's something we could
When I
do
think about
with
the
the
parks,
parks.
that's what I wonder, which is what trees do we have in the parks? And if you're new to the area, you're not necessarily gonna know that.
Yeah.
Great.
So, so that is an example, I think, of what we could do in cooperation with another group like the Parks Board and the Parks Department. That would be cool.
You could even bring the Climate Action Committee in if any of the trees are at risk.
Oh, yeah, and information about how urban forests affect climate, for example, is some of the sort of thing that we could integrate into outreach
Yeah.
document like that. So I had my name down here only because I had communication with the Stewardship Foundation and some of the other groups over the last couple of years, but this is the sort of thing where I think anybody who wants to be involved can be, and it's sort of opportunistic. When something arises, we can follow through on it. One of the projects that I had talked with John Brew about with respect to the Stewardship Foundation that also would involve the parks is that 5 Acre Woods, which is right near where I live, where Stacy lives. Do you get into 5 Acre Woods?
All the
I
time.
take my dog there every morning.
Yeah.
There is an area sort of on the east side of it, near the street, 44th, that has, it's somewhat overrun with locusts, black locusts, and they are, an invasive species. It would be nice to do a project where they're removed and native trees planted and something like that. And John had said, oh yeah, well, we have work, volunteer work parties in there all the time, and the foundation, Stewardship Foundation, that is. And so that might be a place where we could get the Stewardship Foundation, Tree Board, and the parks all cooperating on
An
something.
alignment on an event
Yeah,
of some
and
kind.
that was another thing that I had thought about as a potential Arbor Day activity, but I think it needs more lead time than we have for doing something this spring. Because the removal is probably gonna have to be done professionally. And so that involves getting funding, getting the contract out, all of those things. So I think we can leave that as it is, and keep in mind opportunities as they arise. The tree walks, this has sort of been a private effort of mine, and we've updated 2 of them. I've got all the photos needed to update the 3rd one. David Hepp, who did the originals, has helped me with a couple of them, and I hope that, well, I don't know, it depends on how mobile I am this spring, whether I'll get around to doing the photography for the 4th one or not. If you guys are not familiar with the tree walks to Lake Forest Park, there's a little booklet that was put out
Yeah.
15 or 20 years ago now. And it describes, has some background information, it describes 4 walks you can do and what trees you see as you go around. It's really nicely done. David Hepp did the original. But it was strictly text, it had no images, so it was hard to, unless you really knew your trees to begin with, it was hard to
Yeah.
tell, what am I looking at here? So I put together some PDFs where I would use his text, updated as needed, and photos of the trees. And it's downloadable on the city website. You can, put it on your smartphone or whatever, and go do the walk and see the trees as you go.
And when you said parks a minute ago, David, or Dick, I thought you were talking about that item. That a kind of an extension of the tree walks would be trees in a park, in our parks, in the same, handled in kind of the same kind of way.
Yeah, well, so one of the tree walks is Horizon View Park in the neighborhood around it.
Yeah,
And so it has a lot of the park in it. Which is where I sort of got the idea, but I'm thinking. We could do something that would be more than just, here are the trees, this is such and such a species, this is such and such a species. It could have some interpretation about. Tree communities, about ecology, about. The value of. The urban forest canopy to. The community at large. I think there's,
Story.
yeah, I think there's a lot of things that it could be do, that would be more than just about individual trees. And we could do more tree walks also, if we wanted to expand the tree walk part of it. Most of the tree walks are just walking streets and looking at trees that are growing in people's gardens.
Yeah.
Which is, neat, I think. People should be acknowledged for the cool plants that they have growing.
Protecting.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the next page. I think this item that I put on here for last year was resurrecting or otherwise do something with the Heritage Tree Program.
I think we talked about it.
We
last
talked
week.
about it a little bit last time.
Yeah, or it should just go away.
It probably should go away.
I feel like it might be the most
Just get
TV
it back burner
option.
for a while, maybe not even on the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I hate to just forget about it because it's been forgotten about for so long. It deserves either resurrection or burial.
Honorable ending.
Is it still on the website? Didn't you find it last?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's on there, there are descriptions of trees and pictures of trees.
Yeah, I think it's like a PDF.
I mean,
The tree, yeah, the individual trees that have been given that status and.
it's the kind of thing that you wanna be trying to keep updated.
It needs that to make it be sort of useful or. And it's so idiosyncratic that some people nominated trees because.
The
It
kid
was
used
planted
to
by
love
their
to
grandfather, right? And
Yeah.
then it was totally, there was no criterion.
which probably irks the scientists.
Well, one thing I tried to get going a couple of years ago was to try to develop champion trees of Lake Forest Park, right? So the state has a champion tree list. the largest tree of any different species in the state, and they have a whole list, and some of them are here. Well, Shoreline has a bunch of them at the Kruger Garden, for example. But they require pre-measurement of the diameter of the trunk, the height of the tree, and the spread of the crown. And some of those calculations are a little hard to get. I was thinking of something we could challenge residents to do, see if we can find the largest Douglas fir, white pine, or whatever species, right? And start to develop a list, and if somebody says, oh, I know one that's bigger than that, if they see something on the list, they could be supplanted with a bigger champion tree. But training people to do the measurements properly, to actually do it to the state standards, would be difficult.
Could have people just send you the circumference.
So that's what,
And then the top three would send somebody out with a.
well, that's true. We could use that as a starter.
Or send a geometry teacher.
Well, that is, there's some, ways you can measure height from using geometry, right? And diameter of the crown.
But anyway, I don't know. We'll pursue it this time.
It's probably something that, along with the LFP web content, it should be there, since it is on the Lake Forest Farm website.
Is,
Yeah.
when you do this work plan, can you put at the bottom things we are sort of tabling for future consideration, or just not?
We
address it?
could, we haven't done that in the past.
Yeah,
But we included a lot of things in here every year that we know we won't get to everything,
good,
right?
got it.
So it's more of an aspirational work plan than a
Stretch goals,
realistic
yeah,
work plan in that sense.
understood.
So I think if there's anything that we think the tree board, if not this year, in the indefinite future should get to, we might want to keep it on.
I would retitle it, if you're gonna keep it on, then retitle it to like champion tree or heritage tree program.
Cause I think the champion tree thing, Margaret, was that the name of the tree board chair a couple of years ago? And she tried to get, she and I talked about it a lot. She tried to get it started by having a competition among middle school kids or something like that.
Yeah.
But, only 2 or 3 people actually participated in setting
Yeah,
some measurements.
Yeah.
And all we were gonna ask was diameter. And so it sort of never went in front. I think you would have to get, maybe get a few people to actually go out and try to find the largest trees of a number of species and establish a list, and then challenge people to find bigger ones. And that might be the way to get started.
Well, so we can leave it on the way Stacy suggested.
Yeah, and
Maybe just call it a holding category. It's holding.
okay. Okay. The next item is a general invasive plant management. And I sort of, this was something that was new on the list last year. It was a little bit of, what do we do next about invasive species? We'd had this big project that we had $40,000 or $50,000 to support the McAleer Creek restoration that Julia Bent had spearheaded. And then after that, we had the ivy removal contest that Stacy got involved with, along with a few other people. And then we haven't done anything for the last year on this. And I think it would be good. I mean, the current bee in my bonnet is holly. And one of the essays I've been thinking about writing for the Lake Forest Park is on holly. There's been some really interesting research I think I mentioned last time about how fast holly is spreading in our urban forests. And
well, we're gonna do the recording for the Arbor Day thing, the ivy out. I mean, I actually have 3 holly trees on my property that I want to take down, so we could do a similar removal video.
I've been removing holly in our backwood lot now for years, and I took 3 more out this last year. The one I took out just over the last 2 or 3 weeks. It was, the footprint was probably 200, 250 square feet. Because they spread, the root shoots and they layer and they get so dense that nothing grows underneath them. So when I got everything out, it's now this big sort of oval area on the hillside, which has nothing on it. So I've got some sword ferns and planted there and some other things I'm gonna start getting going on.
We cut one down and when I was out there, I disturbed the land or underneath basically the leaves grow down into the ground practically
Yeah.
and reroot into
Yeah.
the ground. And I was
It's
out
called
there, and
layering.
got stung by, it's called layering.
Layering, that's the term.
It was there was a yellow jacket
Oh.
nest down there that it was covering as well. Just that was pleasant.
And they will resprout and, that
Yeah.
you can get the herbicides to paint on the cut stumps. I don't know if that's something that's commercially available or not. I'm going to look into that, but I know they did it at 5 Acre Woods, but it was commercial.
If you'd be interested in working with me on it, I have some ideas on how we can take the Arbor Day event. Plan in that into a scaffolded, like, communication and education plan.
Yeah,
Using, like, start with a long form video that can go on the website, but also edit down into a short form video that can go on socials.
perfect.
Tie that into other, like, invasive species.
Right.
This was
Management.
Exactly.
Communication.
Yeah, this is where I was going.
Yeah.
With that, like package those together and go
Yeah.
further,
Yeah.
right? Start with that.
I think, yeah,
Yeah.
kick it off with an event and then have touch points in various.
And I'd be glad to
communication
help out
methods
with
throughout the rest of the year on.
doing something about Howard, which it could
Yeah.
be the next one. I mean,
Yeah.
The trees, it has been sort of a conscious choice by the tree board over the last several years to take on invasive species as part of our responsibility, in part because the invasive species impact the forests.
Yeah.
They impact regeneration, they impact the mature trees themselves, if you get too much ivy growing on them, and so on.
The essays you mentioned, the newsletter articles, another way to do that, but a part of that too, I would think, is a
Yeah.
pretty direct way to
Yeah, like you
get a
could
message out.
show the video, click into the art, whatever content he writes.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, tying back that one to, like, partnership with other boards, if something like the Climate Action Committee would be interested in doing a shared table at the farmer's market or something like that to do education. I know that we've gotten pushback when
Yeah.
we've done it before, because people want to talk about their beef with planning, but if we focus it
Yeah.
on, if we focus it specifically on, like, the partnership in urban forestry and climate, or like invasive species stuff, and not just say, like, tell us your thoughts about tree permits.
Yeah, I love the
Um,
idea of being. at
I
the
think
farmer's
there
market.
could be some synergy there. I
Yeah.
love to.
Yeah, oh, that's awesome.
So much fun.
Maybe just put a sign, no.
Will not be talking about permits.
Yeah, so
But yeah, I think there's some opportunities to tie some threads through.
every
different
spring,
channels.
there is the Green Fair, right? Is that what it's called?
We should have put that, we should have that, we should talk
Yeah,
about that.
we- Yeah, we did that last year. We had a table at it last year. It's in
uh,
April too, isn't it?
It's March 30th this year, and Corey's been sending out information just today to. I got one, I think, the Stream Keepers activity.
Okay.
Uh,
So
So,
we had a desk last year. I don't know if we did it by ourselves or if we were in conjunction with the Climate Action Committee or another. Maybe they were just in a table next to us.
yeah,
But Marty and I and maybe somebody else came by for a while. And we just had our banner up and had some things to give out and talk to people.
well, the simple approach would be to do something just like that again. If we could have a couple of fact sheets on some of these invasives, might be nice, a one-page thing, something. Do we still have printed material, I guess?
I think we do. I think
Some
that we have some,
maybe, if you.
a couple of brochures that were made up for last year.
If nothing else, be an opportunity to recruit members.
Yeah,
Or just talk to the public about, what we do.
Would your brochure be able to be done in time
It could be.
and printed?
Um, I love tabling and I'm in Toronto on March 30th, so I will not be at that event, but I do love tabling.
Yeah, I think that will be.
And I'm
too
happy
soon-
to help create
too soon
whatever
for me.
materials we need.
Was the brochure you mentioned, Victoria, was it kind of general purpose introduction of the tree board? kind of?
Talking
There were several
about,
things mentioned.
yeah, it's intro to the tree board and as well as just some like urban forestry. It does touch on permitting and things like that. So it's mostly just content from the one that was already created.
Well, that might.
I'll just pass you a copy of it, is how I can answer that question. You can
Elizabeth,
review it at a
you
later
check.
time.
I think we have some brochures about tree board and trees and so on in Lake Forest Park that we have used in the past.
You're on.
I don't know where to look for them. They're probably in an office in a box someplace.
Yes, and there.
Oh,
That's it.
oh, great.
That's
This is what you.
Literally
yes.
just three together, yeah. So you're welcome to pass it over. And like I said, we have more pressing business to actually get through tonight, so you're
Yeah.
welcome to just hold on to that. I was thinking.
No, but this is great.
Think about things later.
Yeah, oh, this is really good.
Okay, so maybe we could finalize this
Yeah.
at our next meeting.
We're farther along than I thought.
I can send out a digital copy to everyone after the meeting and we can go from there.
Thank you.
Okay. What we're doing for time. It's.
Yeah.
3:20, okay. Okay, let's move on. Tree planting and maintenance events. Identify and prioritize areas for replanting. We did this with over the last several months last year with respect to helping the city council develop the plan for the tree planting following the transit work.
And for replacement trees in general, as I recall.
Yes,
Areas
yeah.
where, well, I guess it was more or less specific, wasn't it, to the corridor?
Well, there was three-tiered priorities. I think the corridor was the highest priority and then areas back from the corridor along parallel to it. And then it was other areas in the city, and we identified an area in the northwest part of the city that has the lowest tree canopy coverage as a place where we could promote, homeowners to plant trees that would be provided by the Sound Transit people.
I hate to kind of fall back to this, but this is really a topic where having an arborist or a urban forest manager would be very helpful to work with on that.
Mark, what's the title again? Urban Forest Planner?
Urban forest planner. We wanted to go away from arborist because of the permitting review and back office tasks and coordination with commissions, and chose forest instead of forestry.
Uh-huh.
Do you have candidates, Mark?
We do, and it's only been a week, and so I'm highly encouraged by the almost immediate attention.
Good. Yeah, I think Julia Bett said she knew somebody who was interested in applying, so.
First review is the 19th, so if you do know anyone or anyone that knows somebody that might be interested, now would be a good time to keep blasting it out.
Great.
Okay, I think that this is is one of those things that's sort of on hold until we know more about the transit plan and how that money is going to be dispersed and who's going to take responsibility. But I think we want to keep it here for now. Larry, do you have any new information or insight on how the transit plan and the funds are going that will be available eventually?
I don't have any information. I know Sound Transit's still in the midst of all the planning stuff. I think the there are some changes to the bus lines coming in the next couple of years, but that's not actual the building of the new BRT lane. And so, yeah, I just think it's too early in the process that maybe we'll see Sound Transit decide to contract out with King Conservation District to develop the plan. But I think it's too early for any sort of boots on the ground plantings or anything like that.
I think you're right, call it a hold and sign it for now.
I'll leave it on, but it's just not gonna be a priority. It's one of those things that when that happens, it's gonna involve us pretty intensively, I think. But
Yeah, so focus
it's
on.
out of our hands.
Yeah. Focus on.
If I could, for what it's worth, I think their latest, they're targeting either 27 or 28 for the BRT project being completed.
Huh.
And so it's gonna be another few years.
Okay. And I think all the planning around what we needed to do this last fall is done now, right? As far as the city is concerned. It's out of our hands.
That's correct. Yeah, we've adopted the permit requirement for major tree plantings and public rights of way. So we have the code. I mean, if you find any flaws, by all means tell us, but we have the code in place. So when Sound Transit finally starts applying for permits, they'll be applying under the code that you helped develop. Mark Hoffman, did you realize there's two Marks now? So did you want to add anything to that?
No, it's good to hear that that code work is in place, as opposed to we need to start that code work and do a development code amendment. So I'll review that. They are squarely in design and haven't submitted for any permits. So that is the status.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the other item on here was the Mackler Creek restoration. This is the project that Julia had initiated. The project is done, but I talked with Julia about this a few weeks ago, and she was concerned that at the early stages, when the new plants are still being established and starting to grow, that some additional effort to keep down weeds and other things is likely to be needed. And whether that comes in a form of volunteer labor or using some funds that we may have available to have the group that did it, the original work, come back through and do a second pass to, remove weeds, to give the native plants that are planted the advantages they need to survive. I'm not sure, but I want to just leave this on the work plan for a moment for this year, and I'll just rename this the Mackler Creek Maintenance or something.
Exactly what I just did.
And I'll put my name down associated with this, and we'll just keep an eye on it. And I see Julia often enough, and she's monitoring those plants, and because it's sort of her baby. And I think that if it comes to the point where we need to do something, we'll see what we can do. Okay, advising the mayor and the council and citywide tree studies and tree fund spending priorities. A lot of this is sort of ongoing responsibilities that don't necessarily have explicit events or goals that we need to take into account. But the first one here that is making recommendations to the council on the findings from the tree, this is a tree canopy study that's every 5 years. That's a separate issue from the tree inventory that we've just completed. I'm not sure where we are in the 5-year cycle for this, but it seems to me this is something that's going to be coming up pretty soon. Doug has been staying engaged with this because he likes this kind of work. This is done with aerial photography, LiDAR mapping in which the raw data for this is made available by whoever does it periodically, and it's a matter of Lake Forest Park or someone downloading the available data and then doing the canopy analysis from it. It's a much more explicit and precise estimate of canopy cover than the inventory was, but it doesn't tell you anything about what the trees are that you're seeing. Right, so it's strictly a canopy cover analysis, but it's a great one because we're proud of our canopy cover, and this gives us hard data on that. I'll leave that down here and leave Doug's name associated with it. The second one is the assessing results of tree inventory study, make recommendations to the council on exceptional tree sizes. So this is one that we've been waiting for the tree inventory data to return to one of the recommendations that we had made for changes to the code that the council had tabled, and that was, do we want to change the minimum size for the exceptional trees that get the highest level of protection in the code? And there were a couple of issues there. One is, do we want to reconsider the size of any of those trees? And the second one was, there's actually more than two issues. One is, do we want to reconsider the size? Second is, do we want to just have a set number? I think in the code previously, it was 7 species of native trees, and they each had their own minimum size. There might have been a couple that had the same, but they were sort of all over the map, which made it a little harder to implement. And then the third is, do we want to have only those 7 species? Or do we just want to protect trees of a large size, regardless of whether they are native or not? Because there are certainly some beautiful big trees that are not native trees in our city that I think deserve the same level of protection as, say, a big Douglas fir does. Just based on their size and the value that they have for all of the reasons that trees are valuable.
What's the work that needs to happen on this? It's tree board meeting work.
I think we do need to wrestle with those questions again and come up with whether we want to make recommendations to the city for changes on that list. I mean, explicitly, the size minimums were something that we had made recommendations before. The council had said, let's table this until we have more data. And now we have the data from this inventory that can tell us, what percentage of trees are above a certain size. And we can,
When we wrestle with this question on the next or agenda after, can we have sort of what are considered exceptional trees now and do like a comparison?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, so there's a table that's actually in the tree code for the list these 7 species and what the
Yeah.
minimum size are for exceptional tree status. And so that's, you can look that up, or you can send me a note and I can send that to you. And
Or just as part of the
And the-
board package.
one of the questions was, so how many trees are there at Lake Forest Park of this species that are above this size? And we didn't know, and that's where the inventory comes in. At least from the plots, we can create an estimate of what proportion of Douglas fir trees are over, 36 inches, let's say, whatever.
Yeah.
And if it's 10%, well, gee, that's a lot. But if it's 1/2 of 1%, maybe we ought to be protecting more trees and therefore shrink the minimum size for an exceptional tree.
Well, whatever person works on this, can they provide that information to whatever meeting we decide to
Yes,
talk about
yes,
it?
and so it's part of the raw data for the inventory that was just completed.
Yeah,
And so Doug has been working with those data,
okay,
and I think his plan is to pull together what this would look like.
perfect, great.
The other question of whether we want to protect all large trees is logically a separate issue. And, we can't, it doesn't make sense to specify all of the species that we want to protect above a certain size. So it either is a matter of sticking with a limited list of species that we give our highest protection to. Or not specifying species, just saying our highest level of protection should be to any tree over a certain size.
Can we do both? We could say any tree over a certain size and all these species.
Well, it's. I think the city council would say, let's not be too complicated here.
Got it.
Because it has to be up to the city staff to implement and enforce and so on.
Yeah,
So whatever we decide, we have to justify pretty well to the council in that recommendation.
Are there other tree types that you have in mind that get into the 36-inch
Well, so
range?
people talk about giant sequoias, for example.
Yeah.
Which can get to that size at a pretty young age.
Yeah.
And then, there are some big, English walnut trees in town and other, not native trees, but things that were planted as ornamental trees in the early years of the community. Because they were popular street trees that are now big, really big. And, it would be a shame to not see them protected.
Well, anyway, that's helpful. So that should be on our agenda, one of our
Yeah.
meetings to
Yes, I
take
think-
that topic up
Yeah.
and work with it.
Yeah, once we get through, we have a few things coming up quickly, like the Arbor Day, the Green Fair. And so that would be one that I think we should definitely work on later this spring or this summer.
It may be,
Yeah.
so go ahead.
No, I was just saying, yeah, that seems like the reasonable timeline. Also a chance for the new, presumably it will be in deep partnership with the new urban forest planner, so time for them to get their feet under them and then. Chat with Doug, and then presumably the two of them would bring a proposal for discussion to this group.
If Doug has some insight into that question, it might be appropriate for him to include that in what he has to say to the council. What you have to say to the council, not a proposal or a specific thing, but just saying this tool now raises a question we can
Yeah.
answer a little bit. more
That's
specific.
good. I mean, I think what Watershed is gonna do, they're just gonna present. Here are our results, here's what they need. And Doug might be a good person to say, here are some of the downstream implications of this study for
What will we do with it?
the city and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Meet with the council and mayor. This is an annual thing that the board chair does. When the annual report and the work plan are presented. It involves going to a city council meeting. And, officially turning it over, of course, it's been turned in before, and answering any questions. It's a pretty modest, more work goes into preparing the work plan in the annual report than this. Anything that happens in the city council. I went last time prepared to have to answer questions, and what I mostly found was, it was a time for the council to express their appreciation for the tree board. We talked about that. That felt good.
Council members like the opportunity to do that.
And so the next one, the work plan and the annual report sort of go together. And that's the board chair's responsibility.
Yep. And you plan to do that.
I haven't said it. I thought once we get this approved, I'll talk to Larry or Mark or someone can ask to have it put on the agenda.
You want to write in March? Because I believe we have a tree board meeting that this work plan can return to on March 7th. And
Yes.
if agreed to, we can do the second meeting in March for city council.
That might work. My intent was to have both the annual report and the work plan approved at the next board meeting, tree board meeting. And then the next step is to present it to the council. So that would be good. Hopefully by late March, I will be ambulatory enough that I can participate. I'm having knee replacement surgery in a couple of weeks. And so I'll probably be able to come to the next board meeting, but I may or may not feel very challenged. Okay.
I think they get you up and walking the next day. It's the medication that.
They do,
is the
right,
problem.
I understand that I'll be walking right away, but there still will be.
That's down the hallway in the hospital, not necessarily to a tree-board meeting.
Yeah. But if I can find myself in a place where I put my leg up and ice my knee, I might be able to do that. Okay. The next item was to review the intern tree removal replacement data project. This is a carryover. There was an intern who was hired to summarize all of the tree removal permits and their data by how many trees were removed, how big were they, what species, and so on. And the summary was created, but we've never really taken the time to go over it and see if there's anything in it that was, merited action. And I think when we talked about this last time, there was a lot of question as to whether that was worth doing anything with it. It's not like future tree permits are gonna be, succeed or fail based on what the summary of the past tree permits was. But it does seem like interesting data.
What was the question that the intern sought to?
Well, it was that every month we are generally presented with, we haven't lately because we haven't had an arborist in place, with a summary of all of the tree removal permits that have been given in the past month. Not necessarily the number of trees that are taken down, but just the permits that have been approved or applied for. I don't know if they've necessarily all been approved when we see this summary, but eventually those get filed away, and we never see anything in aggregate for this, and that's what the intern was hired to do. It was just an undergrad from UW, I think, who was hired to do it. And he went through all the old files a couple of years ago and compiled a spreadsheet of all the species and all the numbers and how big they were that were of trees that were removed through the permit process. And then we just never did anything with it. It wasn't, I don't know if it was something that the tree board initiated or if the city initiated it. I don't remember much about it.
Is it is this a repeatable thing where we get an intern every year who can
It's
do?
not, no, it was done once as far as I'm aware, period. And it was
So it seems
now,
like
it's
the
been
data-
several years. And I
Yeah.
think it was pre-pandemic.
So the data is kind of out of date.
Well, the data was a summary of a window in time.
Picture of time.
Of
You
several
get to a
years.
Point where it's
Yeah.
stopped out, But and did this, I think the Stewardship Foundation funded that. Oh, maybe, I think they give us a grant for that, or they paid that person a stipend. I believe.
Since your name's near it, Dick, maybe you just want to look at it while you're laid up after.
Yeah, I think my name ended up with it last year because
Kidding.
no one knew what it was, and I was gonna try to see what I could find out about it. Anybody have any thoughts about whether this is something we should?
I mean, it's interesting,
Research it.
right? Cause like it presents a snapshot in time and you could look at what our tree canopy looked like. And did all of those permit removals have a tangible impact on that?
It actually
Well, that's
seems to me like it feeds into a couple of the others that we have use that information as we're talking about exceptional tree sizes. See if that data can tell us anything about trends and how many trees are we talking about in different size ranges. As well as when we're talking about reviewing the tree list for replacement trees, if there's anything that we can learn from that data. So not reviewing it independently as like its own interesting thing, but
Sure.
using it as a data point.
Yeah.
We're looking at other pieces. of
Yeah,
work that we're doing this year.
that's,
Yeah.
looking at the size distribution of large trees with respect to our exceptional tree standards.
Yeah,
would
which
be-
ones are coming
The
down?
work was probably done before there was an exceptional tree.
But if it's organized by size, it can tell us a bit about over a period of time, how many trees were we talking about at different sizes?
Yeah.
So we can, as we're thinking about like, does this number need to go up, down, stay the same, we can look at what
That's
tree
good.
impact.
I imagine that some of the information it was out to get is now provided, superseded by the inventory. And part of that study was to try to get the sense of where the forest was going. What trends were there in the forest in terms of types of trees that were being removed? I don't know.
Well, the inventory would tell us what exists now, and
It'll
that
tell us
list
what
will
we
tell us
have.
what was removed or permitted to remove. Yeah.
The methods of data gathering on the tour are so different that it's hard to know
Uh,
how much you.
Well,
And they'll tell us
Yeah.
different stories about different things, so.
And the tree replacement that's required as part of the permit. As far as I'm aware, there is no follow-up information on that. Right, I mean, you have to have a staff of arborists, right, to follow up on tree replacements.
It's all on our system.
Period of, multiple
I
years.
think the planning department is following up, especially on bigger projects, you know. I think, I hope, but, everybody's due. I'm not sure what.
let's say they do, even if they don't.
I know for
Fear.
individual homes and tree replacement projects, it's really hard to
Yeah.
do follow up.
Yeah, and then there's never,
And if you're putting in 4 homes someplace and you've got a more substantial replacement requirement. I think our arborist in the past was making more of an effort to be sure to cover those.
Yeah.
well, those are probably where the.
Yes.
That's just lie.
Moments when I wish the tree board had badges. Tree board following
Oh.
up.
I've got a 3D printer, I can just make.
Do that. You ever hear a chainsaw going in the afternoon, you gotta go down and look and see what's going on.
Well, I did that for the,
Permit and,
that big one, that was where the people cut down 4 or 5 big Douglas firs on a property not far from our house, just up the
I
pipeline.
know, yeah.
And I called, the arborist, Hannah, not Hannah, before her, forgot my name.
yes.
But anyway, she immediately went up and put a cease and desist order on it.
Yeah.
I think that's still in litigation as to how much they're gonna have to pay and I would have fined, although maybe it's been settled by now. I've never heard of it. The initial fine was $80,000.
Yeah, people paying 27,000 for violation. But so it sounds like we not ready to throw that one out. We want to chew on it some more and keep
Yeah.
it there. And figure out how we work with it.
Or just
And I-
divide it up,
I think what I might do is,
split it.
when I get a look at this, ask Elizabeth, maybe once you're settled in, to look around and see if we can find this. If it's if that
Yeah.
intern result is somewhere in the city archives, if there was something that was done for the Stewardship Foundation, I wonder if they ended up with
I think they would be a source of the cost.
the results of that report.
Here's the tree list one.
Okay, review tree lists and reconcile discrepancies in canopy after those improvements. Okay, this is the one in which at the last meeting, Doug gave a presentation about this. And we had pretty much decided in conversations over the last several months that we should have a proscribed tree list of species that are on the King County noxious weed list and watch list for invasiveness. That we should come right out and say that these species should not be used for replacement trees. And maybe it would also have the carryover effect of people seeing that and deciding not to plant those trees, even if it's not in a tree permit setting. The other aspect of this that there was still some disagreement on, at least on my behalf, was whether the tree list should be a recommended tree list or a required tree list. And the correspondence I had with Bill last fall, he came down squarely on the side that he wanted us to have a required list for allowable trees to be used as replacement trees. And there's, some that he said the reason he wanted it was that he didn't think it should be in the lap of the arborist to make decisions about what is acceptable or not. So therefore, if there's a required list, the arborist could just look at that and say, it's on the list, it's okay. If it's not, it's not. The other aspect of it is that list does have canopy height and spread estimated for 20 or 30 years, whatever it is that the tree permit requires. And so that way, someone can be sure that they're fulfilling the requirements of canopy replacement by choosing something off the list that fits the expectation.
Yeah. And presumably Phil had some insight into the legality of doing that.
Yes. The downside, of course, is that there are hundreds of great tree species that could be planted here.
Well, anybody who wants to plant one of those trees is free to do it, aren't they?
But it wouldn't be acceptable as a replacement
As a
tree.
replacement tree, that's right. So it's
So-
only have some tropical tree that you do could grow in this climate somehow, especially in 10 years.
It wouldn't have to be tropical. I know trees really well, and I've looked at that list, and there are fabulous trees that
Yeah.
are growing all over Seattle and Lake Forest Park. They're not on the list. And that I can imagine somebody would like to grow. And, for many people, replacement is just that. You don't have room to plant a lot of trees. And if you wanna grow a dove tree, or, some other unusual tree, actually dove trees, I think are on the list. That's your chance to remove a tree that you don't want to plant.
So that's one, it sounds like for assigned, you and Doug have done a lot of the
Yes.
initial work on it, needs to be brought back once
Yeah.
the new urban forest planner is on board
Yeah.
to work in partnership with them on what if any form of recommendation we want to bring forward.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing based on work planned over the next few meetings that we're also looking at probably summer for
Yes,
visiting that
yeah,
in depth, spending a whole meeting on it.
that and the recommendations, if we choose to make any on changes to exceptional tree sizes and so on, would fall under the category of code issues, because they are
Yep.
specified in the code. And if we want to make recommendations for changes, so those two things are linked in that regard.
Okay.
The comprehensive plan for tree related goals. We haven't done anything like this as long as I've been on the tree board. Is there a comprehensive plan that the city does, or the council goes through a process every 5 years or something?
Yes.
Is that
Yes,
right,
yes.
Larry?
What's going on right now?
Yeah, it's right now under Growth Management Act, it's every 10 years. And then you have annual docketing and a 5-year check-in. The city has started, and we've actually at the point with the Planning Commission, between now and June, we're going to have draft elements, which are, the land use, housing, transportation. A lot of what's in there is valid and remains, but it's an opportunity to meet new legislation, Vision 2050, King County planning policies. But this item for the tree board would be very timely. So between now and June.
That my recollection of this discussion when it came out last was that the tree board wants to make sure that the city keeps trees and the tree related issues in front of mind in this process. So at whatever stage you feel you have material that you are willing to share, that would be a good for us to look at it.
And the comprehensive plan exists right now, and so all those policies are in there, and there's no plan or conversation to take any of the tree related ones out.
Okay.
So the question then becomes, do we augment them, strengthen them, or things beyond just typos and so forth? The one suggestion I have is, as we adopt the climate action plan and incorporate that, there will be cross references and opportunities that deal with both issues. But if the tree board is aware of the tree policies currently in the plan, and has any suggestions, staff is open to that. We don't need to leave it to SCJ, the consultant. We can do that with you. The one thought I had in mind in reading this new tree analysis is there are 3 or 4 prime recommendations: tree inventory, prohibited tree inventory. Those could be new policies inserted into existing elements fairly easily. And we would have essentially between now and June in a very easy format, and then a planning commission recommendation. And then the goal would be summer and fall for the city council to review all of the suggested recommended amendments and take action by December.
I don't think I've ever seen a comprehensive plan, so is that somewhere that I can find on the website, or could you send me a link?
It is, and it's actually, as a planner, one of the first things you learn is whenever you hear the word comp plan, it's not just a document that collects dust on a shelf. It's a living, breathing document, and most people don't read it. But it's the high level vision, mission, and policies and goals of the city. So it's not the development regulations that you may be more familiar with, but it's the policies that generate and support the regulations. And trees are a subset, so it's fairly easy to see what the policies are. They're primarily in land use and environmental elements, but they're throughout the code. But to become aware of what they are, we can help focus on the existing ones.
Well, perhaps you could send a link of that around to the tree board members?
Well, if you go to the city's website and in the search field, you put comprehensive plan, you'll get it directly that way.
Yeah.
I was just looking at it.
Are there climate action plan policies that are meant to be put into that plan that would affect trees that we wouldn't see by going to that link?
Well, you wouldn't see any draft climate
Right.
action plan.
That's what I'm asking, yeah.
Yeah.
Are there draft things that we should see that are coming from the climate action?
Not quite yet. There is a
Okay.
climate action plan draft, and we're going to incorporate that in at some level. And we have a new commerce grant, so it's going to be a lot of work forthcoming. My first meeting to start talking about blending in the climate action plan into the amendments is tomorrow with Sarah. And a lot of those climate action plan policies and so forth will affect trees and habitat, and work along with the purpose of the tree board.
Right,
So if we were to review the existing comp plan and come up with recommendations, would that go directly to, where would we, I guess my question is the planning commission playing a central role in terms of pulling the stuff together, or are they concerned about their own discussions internally to the planning?
Oh no,
commission?
it's everything. You know, it's not a wish list, right? It's not, let's put everything in a binder that we could ever want. It's focus, and there are requirements under the Growth Management Act. But one of the roles of the Planning Commission expressly is this periodic relook at the policies and to make a recommendation. They don't adopt the comp plan or the amendments, but their role is to look far and wide at all the issues in the city: transportation, housing, climate, being the newest one, tree policy, stormwater, everything. And all the policies related.
I'm sorry, Mark, I didn't want to interrupt. Would our recommendations or thoughts go to the planning commission?
Yeah, through
Or would
staff. Yeah.
You as the planning director?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we could do that. Because I'm willing, and I've only read it once and not intensely for any specific issue, but there there's nothing wrong with the policies that are in there now, but that's the starting point. This periodic update is, are they still relevant? If not, get rid of them. Is anything missing? Add it. If what's in there needs to be amended, now's the time. So those are the possible activities, but it all starts with what's in there.
Larry,
Right, thank you. The last item on here,
Well, looks like
Larry.
Larry does.
oh, I'm sorry, Larry, did you have something?
Yeah, two things. First, I think maybe it might be a good idea for one of you to meet with the chairs of the Planning Commission and Climate Action Committee. So Maddie Larson at Planning and then Sarah Phillips at Climate, just to kind of get a feel for where they think tree-related matters might be. And also just a time check. I know there were technical issues at the beginning, but it is 8:57 and you still have election of officers. And I don't know how much longer I'm going to be on. In keeping with the theme that I'm at Disney, I think I'm going to turn into a pumpkin in 3 minutes. So I'm probably going to pop off the Zoom at
yeah,
all
midnight
right,
my
thank
time.
you. I think we're about done with this. Reviewing the council strategic plan, I don't know if there is a strategic plan process going on now. Mark or Larry, do you know anything about that?
It right now it would be all the policies would be in the comprehensive plan. If there's a separate plan, that's a separate instrument. The comp plan amendments come first, and some of the action items could be to amend another report or relook at a report or create a report.
So we don't have a strategic plan process going on separately from the comprehensive plan.
Not that I'm aware of, and I've only been here 4 weeks, but for instance, the 2010
Gonna
tree
scratch
plan.
that. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Fine.
We should, I think we should figure out some next step for the comp plan issue that we were just discussing. With whether we want to take the assignment of reviewing it between now and the next meeting. And putting it on our agenda, at least at a first look at it.
I heard Mark say that there would be drafts of this coming up in June or something like that. Was that when you?
We have until June to get.
We have
any
until June.
recommendations
Yeah.
for-
So I think we have some other things that are probably gonna be on the agenda for next month, but maybe by April or May, we could have an item.
I'm happy with that, I guess but
But
we
to
should all be
Larry's-
aware of it and start looking at that.
No, that's right.
yeah, and to Larry's point, he did mention the chair, maybe Dick should
Yeah.
meet with climate action chair to see if there.
Yeah, that may be something that the new chair should do.
I'll talk to Sarah.
Okay,
That would be
Chairs. could be like-
Larry's suggestion's really good. For instance, last night we held a special meeting specifically to discuss the land use element. And they are already aware of what you do and the policies and are already speaking to amendments that you might find favorable.
Good. Okay. So I think we're done with the work plan. My next step will be to incorporate all the notes that I jotted down on here and send this around for you guys to see. And at the next board meeting, we'll have a vote to adopt the work plan.
That would be excellent.
And I gave you all drafts of the annual report, and one thing I didn't note was that we did have a table at the Green Fair last year, and I'll put that in as another item that we did, activity we did. Okay,
We can take another, finalize this.
Yeah.
That's appropriate at the next meeting.
okay, I wanted to have under new business, election of chairs. We're not gonna hold an election today, but I think I sent around a note about my ideas about the election. One is that I wanted to just apprise everybody of how this works, since I look around the room and I'm the only one that's been involved in an election in the past.
You've done a great job.
Are
Are you sure you don't want that?
I am sure that I don't want to do it again. My goal would be to have this be more of a rotating thing, and have people do it for a year. And then, but act as vice chair in the year leading up to that. And then we can rotate through and everybody gets a chance to do it. It does become a bit of a burden if it's one person that does it repeatedly. When I first joined the board, Gordon can't think what his last name was. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a real guy, he did a really good job as chair, and he wanted to be chair. And he was chair for, I think, 3 or 4 years. Until he finally just said I had enough and left. But, you know, I think he actually is now on the climate action, or no, the planning commission or something. But anyway,
Wasn't he another UW guy?
I don't think so. I think he was a professional forester or something like that. But we are obligated under the city's guide to commissions and boards to elect officers in February of every year, terms and terms of your service and at the end of February, and officers' terms at the end of February. So we should do this at the beginning of March next year. We hadn't over the years been paying attention to when this should be done, but I think we should do it on a regular basis. And I know we have a number of people who are new here, and we've lost several experienced board members in the last year. Doug did express his preference to not be chair because he's not good at this sort of thing. I think that's actually, I think he would be good at it, and he did express his willingness to do it for a year. So I think he will, if we nominate him to do it next year, be willing to do it for the coming year. And then it would be a matter of having somebody step up as to take vice chair. So think about these possibilities. You know, Victoria and Stacy, you're so new on this that you're still just figuring things out, and I wouldn't expect you to take that role on right away. Which really has been looking at.
Yeah.
Potential.
Of elimination.
But I don't wanna, you know, short circuit anybody else that might be, they like to move quickly into those leadership
And
roles.
Margaret, whose last name I can't think of either right now, who was the board chair before me, took it on in her first year.
Wow.
She was a very organized person, and she did a great job. You know, she just came in and said, okay, I can do this, and because it was, you know, no one particularly wanted to right then, and I think our previous chair left sort of midterm because he moved out of town.
Are there guidelines somewhere of what the roles and responsibilities are for a chair and vice chair?
No. But I can tell you right now, being chair is, you work with Elizabeth to set the agenda for each meeting, and then you chair the meeting. And then after that, the only other real responsibilities that the chair has is to prepare the annual report and present the annual report and the work plan to the city council.
Okay.
Which occurs this time of year, February, March typically. And then that's it. Otherwise, it turns out that the chair is the person who sort of bulldogs things, right? To make sure things get done.
Keeps things.
But
And what about the vice chair position?
the vice chair is there to step in if the chair is not there.
Okay.
It's, you know,
Like having
chair.
surgery or something.
And the
For
only,
example.
the only
Sorry.
occasion in the last couple of years when I haven't been here, last year Doug was vice chair. The year before, we didn't have a vice chair. Because, I stepped in to be chair and we just never had an election for a vice chair. So I want to get this back on track, with having this be sort of a routine thing that everybody participates in.
I'm sure we can figure it out next year.
The annual report was the only other thing on new business, and as I said, you've all got a copy, please read it, and if you think of anything that, and you see any edits, think of anything that should be in it that is not, let me know, and we'll approve that next week. Do I hear a movement to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Stacy, second,
Second,
all in favor?
I.
Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you, Mark and Larry, for joining in, have fun in Florida. Thank you,
Yeah,
Elizabeth,
enjoy Disney.
helping out.
Get some.
Thank you all.
Yeah, it's late.
I
Have
forgot
a
it's
good
like
night.
midnight.
Oh, man.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Forgot about it.
Poor Larry. You know, I've only ever seen him in really stressful situations. You know, he like came late here